Let's just dive right into it. Have you ever wondered if ancient Buddhist monastic rules were, more than just rigid dogmas? Well, it turns out the Sarvastivada Vinaya is actually this incredible, constantly evolving system of common law. It's literally case law built from the ground up by the Buddha himself. In this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly that. We'll analyze the key principles of discipline and dispute mediation in the Sarvastivada Vinaya and see exactly how the Buddha used specific, real-world case studies to establish strict standards of purity for his community. It's a fascinating look at ancient human behavior and, honestly, brilliant legal problem-solving.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the Buddha's case studies. Second, daily Sangha decorum. Third, the 7 dispute methods. Fourth, special mental states. And finally, number 5, tokens and covering with grass. Let's get started.
All right, part 1, the Buddhist case studies, featuring some highly relatable human troublemakers. Okay, so the story really starts with these infamous groups, the 6 group monks and the 17 group monks. You see, the Buddha didn't just invent rules out of thin air. He had to respond to real, everyday human friction. These guys had normal human flaws, they constantly bickered, and frankly pulled some incredibly childish pranks. There's this one wild story where the 6 group monks actually stole the 17 group monks' food and then ran off and hid in a crowd. And the hungry 17 group monks were searching everywhere, to the point where one guy literally climbed up a massive tree just to get a better vantage point. When the Buddha heard about this, he didn't just yell at them, he established a legal precedent. He ruled that unless it's a sheer emergency, a monk cannot climb a tree taller than the height of a human. And just like that, practical order was established, case by case.
Moving on to part 2, establishing daily Sangha decorum and managing the community's public image.
So the Buddha had to tackle all this daily friction to keep the Sangha's pure reputation intact. That meant laying down strict rules about respect, etiquette, and even public hygiene. Take King Presenjit of Kosala, for example. He was a super devoted follower, but, well, sometimes he completely lacked basic respect. He'd ask monks to preach to him while he was sitting way up high on his chariot, holding weapons, wearing leather shoes, while the poor monk just had to stand there. So the Buddha set clear boundaries. He declared that a monk cannot preach to anyone holding weapons, wearing hats or shoes, or sitting on a higher seat. But, and here's the kicker, unless that person is physically ill. I love this because that medical exemption perfectly highlights how the Buddha combines strict legal boundaries with deep, practical compassion.
This case law approach also heavily protected public resources. Remember those disgruntled 6 group monks? Well, after a gardener refused to give them free vegetables, they threw a literal tantrum and ruined the public vegetable garden. Later, when a laundryman wouldn't wash their clothes for free, they trashed the public laundry water. They even polluted the local Sumana pool just for fun. Naturally, the public was absolutely furious, so the Buddha stepped in and strictly prohibited monks from polluting public water sources or crops, firmly cementing community hygiene as a core part of religious law.
All right, part 3, the 7 methods of settling disputes. This is where we get into the real heavy-hitting legal framework.
We just looked at everyday etiquette, but what about serious legal conflicts? That's where the 7 methods come in, designed specifically to extinguish deep conflicts and restore community harmony. The first key mechanism here is settlement by self-confession. Imagine this scenario from the texts. A visiting guest monk goes to the bathhouse at night and accidentally mixes up his clothes with, you guessed it, the hostile 6 group monks. They immediately accuse him of theft and try to formally banish him from the community, even though the poor guy never admitted any guilt. He runs all the way to the Buddha, who instantly overturns the banishment. The Buddha ruled that you absolutely cannot force punishments on anyone without a valid, voluntary, verbal confession. Due process was absolutely crucial.
Now, to prevent coercion and false confessions, the Buddha essentially built a rigorous matrix. He explicitly defined 10 types of illegal confessions and 10 legal ones. For instance, if you commit a major crime but only admit to a minor one, illegal. If you didn't commit a crime at all but are pressured into saying you did, also illegal. The content of the confession literally has to match the specific crime committed for it to be a legally binding settlement. It's incredibly thorough.
Let's look at part 4, handling special mental states. This shows the incredible nuance of this ancient law system. It brings up a really fascinating question. What actually happens if a monk breaks a major rule while completely insane? In a lot of ancient cultures, they'd just be severely punished or banished, no questions asked. But the Buddha took a radically different approach. He introduced an ancient version of the insanity plea. There's this monk named Gaga who suffered a severe mental breakdown, running around and breaking a ton of monastic rules. When he finally regained his sanity, the other monks just kept harassing him for his past actions. So the Buddha intervened. He established a formal legal settlement granting Gaga total immunity for actions committed while he was mentally incapacitated. I mean, for ancient times, that is a wildly progressive legal safeguard.
Then there's settlement by recollection of innocence. Let's look at the highly respected elder Daba Malaputta. A nun, trying to ruin his reputation, filed completely baseless, fabricated charges against him. Because Daba had a completely spotless track record and a clear, mindful recollection of his innocence, the Buddha created a formal declaration of innocence just for him. This legally shielded him, ensuring that monks with perfect records couldn't be endlessly dragged down by baseless slander.
And that brings us to part 5, tokens and covering with grass. How to restore total community harmony.
So, what do you do when an entire community is tearing itself apart? Over in the city of Kasambi, monks were endlessly bickering and suing each other. Factions formed, and it literally threatened the survival of the entire religion. The Buddha handled this by creating an escalation ladder for dispute resolution. If a squabble couldn't be solved locally, it went through specific steps. First, they'd appoint a neutral single arbitrator. If that failed, a special committee. Still failing, they'd invite a neighboring sangha to intervene. And finally, if all else failed, they'd use an ancient jury system. A trusted monk would hand out voting tokens. Longer white tokens meant a legal vote of approval, while shorter black tokens meant illegal. They'd strictly count the majority to end the dispute once and for all.
But wait, what if voting just creates better losers and even more resentment? That leads us to the final, and honestly, the most beautiful resolution method: covering with grass. When a dispute gets so bad it threatens to destroy the community, both sides mutually agree to just stop the accusations, they gather together, confess their minor faults, apologize, and wipe the slate completely clean. Just like grass growing over the dirt, they agree to bury their grievances and prioritize harmony above absolutely everything else. So, the Buddhist system wasn't just about pointing fingers or blindly following rules. It was a constantly evolving common law designed to balance strict logical boundaries with ultimate compassionate forgiveness. And that leaves us with a pretty profound question. How can we apply this ancient wisdom of structured harmony and forgiveness to our own modern communities today? Think about how you might use this balance of strict boundaries and total forgiveness in your own life. Thanks so much for watching this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.